So I'm absolutely delighted now to welcome Bella Brover-Lubovsky, who is going to be uh, taking a paper, taking a week off Giuseppe Sarti in the Russian Empire. So thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Larissa and all the conference organizers for assembling the scholars and the diaspora of Russian music enthusiasts in this not simple time. Before I start, I just want to express my thanks to Dr. Guy Leclerc for enabling me and access to the private family archives of the Sarti Musini family, to Anna Leonidovna Porfirieva and Galina Viktorovna Kopytova from Russian Institute of Art History, and to Dr. Simone Laghi for sharing with me his transcription of the piece of music that I will discuss later. So here you can see two portraits of the same musician, Giuseppe Sarti, and in order to save our time, I will just reveal that both were created in the same years, 1798 and 1799. So maybe even the right portrait was created before the much more known one, I'm not saying famous, portrait by Salvatore Tonci, but this is a great difference between the representation of this composer, because here on Tonci's portrait, we see Sarti in a wig with this jacket of a court composer, of a court servant, all these laces on his sheet, and he's holding a piece of sheet of music with his composition and his machine for measuring the pitch level of St. Petersburg orchestra, for which he received a title of the Academy of Sciences member, honorary member in St. Petersburg. And the right-hand portrait is by Helbig. I have no idea what was his first name, from the Hermitage collection. So here is the same composer Sarti without a wig, in a bourgeois costume. And the way he is represented is kind of a self-efficient. So we see him here not as a servant, but as a bourgeois, as a honorary member of society. So how did he perform this transformation? I'm going to discuss the trajectory of Sarti's career during his 17 years sojourn in the Russian Empire. In the late 18th century, the Russian Empire was considered a true gold mine for the European cultural intelligentsia. Musicians, poets, choreographers, dancers, painters, and architects crowded both capitals and additional venues across the empire. Although European values had traditionally dominated Russian cultural life, this massive migration and cultural transfer became overwhelming during the reign of Catherine the Great and her son Paul. Russian victories in the Northern and Turkish wars, the settlement of Novorossiya and Crimea, the partitions and annexation of Poland, participation in anti-Napoleonic coalition, providing a shelter for French royal family and aristocracy, and the hosting of the Catholic Order of Malta in St. Petersburg increased the immigrant population and nourished European cultural hegemony. What attracted European culturati and stimulated their transfer to Russia? First of all, work conditions. The full control of the newly created in 1783 Imperial Committee for Spectacles and Music of both court and public theaters, the Hermitage Theater, Gatchina Theater, Kamenny, and Derevyanny on Tsaritsyn Lug. Secondly, it was stable salaries fixed by the theater direction according to the ranks and position. Italian court composers' stable salary was 3,000 rubles. Native court composer like Maxim Berezovsky earned 500 for the same position and kind of service. By the end of the 18th century, the Russian ruble was a very heavy and stable currency. It was set to 18 grams of pure silver or 1.2 grams of pure gold. A soldier in Russian army in 1798 was paid 9.4 plus ammunition and goods, and in total, he was paid in a year 41.26 rubles. There were benefits annexed to the salary that included travel expenses, 500 rubles at least, plus state apartment and wood for heating, 300 to 500 rubles. And there was a yearly benefits performance. If, for example, we look at this announcement by, it's not an announcement, it's a record from the theater direction by Count Bezborodko. Here we see that the opera Armida Rinaldo, written and performed for the inauguration of the Hermitage Theater by Sarti, on the libretto by Marco Coltellini, by the late Marco Coltellini. He died 10 years before. There was allowed a triple benefit for mezzo-sopran Mademoiselle Luisa Rosa Todi, for Giuseppe Sarti, and for the castrato singer Luigi Marchesi. So after the benefit concert, the composer could put in his pocket like a number of thousands rubles. There were good professional conditions. Best singers, choreographers, dancers, and 2 superb orchestras were in St. Petersburg. Just for a comparison, there were 4 clarinets in B flat, A, and even in D, and corno inglese in both orchestras. And we know what was the situation with the clarinets and other woodwinds in the rest of Europe. And there were considerations that lay outside the professional interests, mainly an opportunity of integration within the flexible social mobility system and upgrading their social status. What was the glass ceiling for such cultural artistic intelligentsia to achieve? There are a number of examples. Vicente Martino Soler, a Spanish composer, received the rank of a court counselor for his opera, 2 operas, Kasametovich and Fidul s Детьми, on the libretti by Catherine the Great. Czech harpsichord player and composer Ernest Vanjura received the same rank for his active part in Kurtags and court chamber concerts, and for his music for Hrabro и Смелой Vitez Archidage on Catherine the Great libretto. French dancer and choreographer Charles Lepic, who came from Milano, and he was Nover's favorite student and colleague, was granted a summer house, dacha, in Pavlovsk, near the residence of his patron Paolo I. Italian singer Anna Davia Bernucci was a mistress of Prince Bezborodko, and her yearly salary was raised up to 3.3 thousand rubles until it was a scandal, until she was forced to leave the country. Pierre and Mademoiselle Chevalier, who were a choreographer and a French soprano, their yearly salary of each of them was 7,000 rubles. And the Mademoiselle Chevalier was a mistress of Count Kutaisov, so we can understand the reasons. There were more interesting examples, like stage design by Pietro Gonzaga, etc., etc. But Giuseppe Sarti's case is most curious and impressive. During 1779 to 1784, Sarti was a maestro di cappella at the Duomo, Metropolitan Duomo in Milano. Actually, it was the top position for church musician in late Settecento Italian states. Concurrently, he staged operas in Milano, Napoli, Venezia, Firenze, etc., etc., and attended all the premieres, leaving all his duty in the Milan Duomo on his vice maestro Francesco Bianchi. In early 1784, he accepted the invitation from Russian court, leaves Milan in late May, and via Vienna, where he meets Mozart, Paisiello, and Joseph II orders to stage his Freie Due Litiganti il Terzo Godo, especially for Sarti's visit in the capital. Then he moves via Sopron, meets Haydn, Esterhazy, and Warsaw. On August 6, he is on the Narva border checkpoint. He is granted with a special privilege to recommend to the theater direction to invite Ferdinando Moretti as a poet to replace the late Marco Coltellini, and the famous castrato singer Luigi Marchesi, with whom Sarti worked at the Milan Duomo, and another bass singer, De Paoli. We do not have his first name. So, Sarti's success at court notwithstanding, in 1786, so after 2.5 years of his tenure at the Russian court, he receives a notification that his contract will not be extended due to his conflict with Luisa Rosa Todi, that we will hear a special paper tomorrow, I believe. Italian opera was dismissed altogether, and Catherine the Great and the court departed to the southern journey that lasted from January to July 1787. It was the famous Путешествие в полуденный край. Sarti, instead of returning to Milan, where his position was reserved for him, chooses to follow Prince Potemkin, Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin, Tavritsky, to the newly colonized Novorossiya region. That is in the news nowadays, you know, all this area. Here Sarti worked in various places, and I will extend further. His negotiation, this is a map, his negotiation with Potemkin regarding his contract probably started prior the late January, because there was a draft that Sarti sent to Potemkin, but I don't have this document. On January 30, Sarti receives the following letter from Kremenchuk. Kremenchuk is now in Poltava region, and it was Potemkin's capital of his new province. And the letter, here is the translation into French, but the original is here. Potemkin is writing, I approve, Monsieur, the conditions of the contract that you sent me, with the exception of the one that announces a gift of a property, for it is not proper that such a clause should be inserted there. I give myself, however, the pleasure of giving you in complete ownership for you and your descendants a village with peasants, for I wish that you may enjoy a happy and comfortable existence in these countries. And indeed, in Novorossiya, Potemkin created his personal kingdom. He founded new towns, kept his own army, and built the Black Sea Fleet. He encouraged the intense colonization of the region. Under his administration, the population of the province had grown from 204,000 to 800,000 inhabitants. Free trade, industry, education, manufacture. There were 8 new factories founded just in Kremenchuk alone, were flourishing, and were created a local nobility, bourgeois, and intelligentsia. He was building cities with their infrastructure and cultural institutions. Foreign professionals, architects, wine growers, manufacturers, landscape designers, Italian engineers like Konstantin Liprandi, that Daniel Zavlonov mentioned him yesterday in his paper. To many of them, lands were granted. That was the idea of colonization. So there was nothing audacious in Sarti's plea to Potemkin. On February 10th, Sarti signed this contract. And just upon arriving in Kremenchuk, which was March 27, Sarti sends a long and very professionally written letter about the administrating the music academy in Kremenchuk. But there are some clauses regarding Sarti's personal requests. So a long letter he sends to Potemkin via Vasily Popov, his secretary. And he is writing, Please, Your Grace, I still did not get the village. So it was just 1 month and a half passed since he signed the contract. I still did not get the village that was promised to me, and due to this reason, my economy is quite weak. If I have a military rent and money, I will ask for a land and were bringing peasants from Italy and build houses. Lands and serfs were granted to many immigrants in the Tauride region. Sarti was not the only musician in Potemkin's service who had been promised a village. Karl Lau, for example, music director of the Rogovoy Orchestra, the Russian horn band, applied with the same request. In 1794, Lau addressed the Empress with a request about the legitimization of his property. However, her decision remains unknown. Sarti's affiliation with Potemkin came to an end in March 1791, when the former decided to remain in Moscow during their visit to the capital, looking for a new patron. And this new patron was supposed to be Count Nikolai Sheremetyev, but there was no official affiliation created between the two. And Potemkin died in October of the same 1791. In 1792, Sarti returns to the court service in St. Petersburg, still receiving a salary for his position in Yekaterinoslav. Catherine died on November 17, 1796. Only 1 month later, which is what we here in Israel call chutzpah, on December 16, same 1796, Sarti sends Paul, the new emperor, the following petition. My whole family begs of your imperial majesty, having been encouraged by his justice and by his clemency. The late Prince Potemkin Tavritsky, on the promise that he had made me by letter, the original of which is enclosed, gave me all rights over a village called Sofievka on 1,513 hectares, situated in the district of Yekaterinoslav on the little river Kamenka, and purchased from General Danin for the sum of 10,000 rubles. On the order of the prince, I took possession of this land on 14th January, probably 1788 or 1789, because the date is not stated in this letter, from Monsieur Prokopovich, professor of agriculture. Subsequently, there was an order by the same prince to give me the possession of krepes. Krepes is an official document of a possession, a land possession, which land and property, which I was never able to receive despite all the steps I undertook for that. During June 1792, I had recourse to His late Majesty, who had the kindness to confirm the donation, wishing to order that I be given the authentic papers of this land. This order having been without effect, I resolved to appeal for the equivalent of the land to Prince Zubov, etc., that he had taken away from me, the property had taken away from me, and the income I have lost, this land having always been administered by the treasury of the crown. Then I learned that all the herds had been sold, and there wasn't even the number of peasants that I had left, having been transferred elsewhere. It would be an abuse of the kindness of your imperial majesty if I had to detail all the steps I have taken up to now without any resolution, despite my request having been found and considered just. It is the continuation here. Now I have only under my eyes the happiness of my family, which must depend on the unbounded mercy of your imperial majesty. Tormented by the debts I was forced to contract for the journey of my children, which I made come from Italy. Apropos, we have no idea if two Sarti's daughters traveled with him from Italy to Russia, or there was just brief periods that they came to visit. I dare throw myself at your feet to implore your kindness in the relief of my family. And the most humble and devoted servant and subject, Joseph Sarti. Probably this letter was submitted along with the cantata entitled Preghiera. The orthograph is in Faenza. The cantata comprises a recitativo for soprano solo and for string quartet accompaniment, recitativo and an aria, two-tempo aria in adagio and allegro. And the text was concocted, I'm sure, by Sarti himself. So the recitativo presso del Boristenian terreno. Boristenian is Dnieper, the Ukrainian Slavic ancient name. And he describes in the Arcadian pastoral manner all the ships and meadows in this village that he'd never received. And then there comes an aria. So if we are looking for a stylistic and cultural implications of Sarti's attempts to earn this village and to upgrade his status, it is a very interesting piece of music in F minor. It is one of very rare Sarti's pieces that are so overtly sentimental in a fashion that Paul liked so much, the French sentimentalism, and the entire piece is very sentimental with all the rhythmic accents and fortepiano contrasts and all the chromaticism, etc., etc. If we can compare this F minor piece with another famous F minor Miserere that Sarti wrote in Denmark, in Copenhagen in 1766, these are two very different F minor treatments of F minor. One is like a neoclassical monumental style, and here it's a sentimental, very, very infant summer piece of music. And it is absolutely clear for me that the text was concocted by Sarti himself as well. It was not Moretti who provided texts for Sarti, because there are a very untypical repetitions of lines and several words. So he submitted the letter and the sound letter, and then Paul opened the whole procedure for checking and verifying the letter that Sarti sent him. I was trained in the Soviet Union that Paul's period of ruling was a great mess, but according to this file, we can state the opposite, the contrary, because the first letter was from the Chancellor. Mr. Sarti, in his petition, writes that the following Prince Potemkin Tavritsky promised he was granted for ownership of a village called Sofiivka in Yekaterinoslav County. Mr. Sarti received for ownership the name village, but did not receive a document that approves his ownership in it. Krepest. Now he asks to pay him money for it and to reimburse him for the interest that he could get from this property starting from the year 1789. Prince Potemkin's letter, on which links Sarti's right on this village, does not prove any village of him, since the prince writes that he agrees on all the conditions offered him in contract with Mr. Sarti, excluding villages. It had been decided, nevertheless, continued the prince, that he will be pleased to endow him a village for hereditary ownership, since he wants him to be happy and quiet in this country. The following letter, everything is from the Russian State Historical Archive. State Secretary announces highest your imperial order to endow the petitioner, foreigner Sarti, a village and land commensurate to the one promised by him by the late Prince Potemkin Tavritsky. The following letter of January 22, 1797. Following the petition of the foreigner Sarti, His Highness Emperor orders me to to check what number of serfs was in the village Sofiivka, Yekaterinoslav Guberny, purchased from General Dunin and granted Sarti by the late Prince Grigory Alexandrovich. And eventually, to the Kapellmeister of our court Sarti, we all benevolently grant in perpetual and hereditary ownership in the Moscow gubernia, Bronitsa okrug, Sofino Volost, the villages Stanovaya and Patkino, in which at the last census there were 218 souls of the male sex, with the lands and estates pertaining to the service of those settlements. And the signature by Paul himself from St. Petersburg, February 19, 1797. So, and it's written for the Kapellmeister of the court Sarti, the aforesaid villages Stanovaya and Patkino, with all settlements and in inhabited lands, homesteads, residential and horticultural construction, thereto pertaining, with fields and meadows, with woods, with hay fields and fishing grounds, and with the resources now contained and fugitive peasants in perpetual and hereditary ownership, and we permit him and his descendants to sell, pay attention, sell, mortgage, and lawfully fortify them. And it was given in Gachina in the year 1797. 1797, in October, that Sarti received a gramota, a document, official document that was missing him from Potemkin's period. Both villages exist nowadays. It is southeast of Moscow County, Ramenskoye district. Stanovaya, its population remains the same as during this action of endowing him a village. It is 151 inhabitants. The village exists since 1577, and now it's a part of the village Sofino. Patkino, its population is 94, according to the census from 2010, and it is 700 meters from the Moscow River right bank. It has houses, people, etc., etc. But what is the most interesting, that according to the census of 1800, both Patkino and Stanovaya were in the possession of collegial assessor Ivan Venedictovich Fotov. So where is Sarti? He just received these villages. Now, Sarti was not a noble. He was the son of a jeweler from Faenza. He was the only son, and there were 10 daughters in addition. So now, in order to possess serfs, he was supposed to be in the status of a noble. And in March 1798, there is another document. The court office listened and received last February, according to the person of His Imperial Greatness highest order given to Senate on 22 of February and signed by His Greatness on hand, in which it has been approved that Professor of Music Sarti, who is in service at our court as a music director and music teacher of him and his privileged daughters, our grand duchesses, to declare him, so this is the order, excuse me, to declare Sarti endowing him a title of collegial consular delivered from the governmental senate order. What means the status of collegial consular in Russian society? This is the original document, Table of Ranks by Peter the Great. This is more intelligible document. This title indicates the sixth position in a system called the Table of Ranks, a formal list of positions and ranks in the military, naval, civil, and court services, arranged into a hierarchy of 14 categories, introduced by Peter the Great. This classification modernized and mobilized the populace and renovated the social fabric of Russia and the system of promotion based on personal ability rather than on birth and genealogy. It requires for the first time that all members of the society serve the state, starting at the bottom of the hierarchical ladder. Membership in a prominent family did not confer any special privileges. The mandatory 10-year of life service, later reduced to 25 years, was only one distressing facet of this system. Other aspect was the newly created social mobility among members of the non-noble mixed classes. The first rank was the greatest honor. In civilian service, for instance, it was called Chancellor, in the Army, General Field Marshal, and in the Navy, General Admiral. A civil servant promoted to the 14th grade gained personal nobility, dворянство, but personal. And to the 8th grade was endowed with the hereditary nobility, with all the legal rights, including to own serfs. Granting serfs and lands was a common procedure. Even Catherine granted about 500,000 serfs during her reign from 62 to 95 even. Civilian rank of collegial counselor that Sarti was endowed, it was number 6, corresponded to the 6th military rank of colonel and first captain in the Navy. What were exact bureaucratic duties? In the Russian bureaucratic apparatus, collegia was the central executive institution and board, consisted of attendances and officers. Collegial advisor could occupy the post of prosecutor or chief secretary of the Senate, or head of the department. In the second triennium of his service, the collegial advisor could become the district leader of the nobility. In 1796, the number of officials of the 6th class collegial consular was just 541. It's not that much. Their salary ranged from 6 to 750 rubles per year, and also allocated funds for the maintenance of 5 horses and pension of 215 rubles. Therefore, Sarti and his descendants became a full-fledged member of the Assembly of Nobility, and he was addressed by Your Excellency. So Sarti made a very impressive self-promotion in Russia. Unfortunately, his outstanding social mobility project did not bring him and his family long-term stability and material wealth. After Paul's assassination on April 12, 1801, he probably, given his previous patterns of social demeanor of both in Russia and earlier in his life in Copenhagen, for instance, he had applied for a pension from Emperor Alexander, but was not treated the way he expected to be. And the St. Petersburgские ведомости Gazette published an announcement. It published regularly on all the foreigners living the capital in the country, that Monsieur Sarti, his wife Camilla Passi Sarti, his 2 daughters and servants were leaving the country in the late May or early June. It's a symbolic that Sarti was living in the same date with Auguste von Kotzebue that they previously collaborated on Sarti's last French opera. And then Sarti, on his way to back to Italy, this is his letter to one of his sisters, who was a nun in the convent of Santa Lucia near Senigallia. The convent is closed nowadays. He is writing that he is planning to return, and he sending her money, and he will pass via Vienna, but before Vienna, prior to Vienna, he will go to, first Vienna, and first Berlin and then Vienna, excuse me. And Sarti arrived in Berlin and remained there for almost the whole year. What is interesting in this letter, he's writing, I have the rank of colonel, but do not put it in the superscription colonel, only call me by title collegial counselor and first Kapellmeister of Her Imperial Grace Majesty of Russia, and honorary member of the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg. Then he arrived in Berlin, and his one of his daughters, Juliana Sarti, was married the Kapellmeister of the Queen Mother of Prussia, Natalia Mussini. And here we have this very interesting document from the private archive, thanks to Dr. Leclerc, again, the Juliana's dowry. So here we read that the chapelmeister of Her Majesty, the Queen Mother of Prussia, Mr. Noel Mussini, in person, and known as such, and the first declared freely by these presents his consent and his paternal benediction of the conjugal union that is to take place tomorrow between his daughter Juliana, Julia Marie, and Mr. Mussini, and he constitutes to the said daughter, independently of the trousseau, the sum of 10,000 rubles, Russian rubles, by way of dowry. And it is signed in Berlin, May 1802. In July 1802, Sarti died in Berlin. He was buried in Berlin. So this is the mystery where what happened with these two villages and where the money, this big money, 10,000 rubles, come from. Because Sarti actually, he used this, option to sell the property even without entering into the possession period. So he actually, he was granted 2 villages, he sold them immediately, and he left the country as a very wealthy man, I should say. So this is the story. It is not a unique story. For example, we can take the path that Farinelli took in Spain when he was endowed a title of aristocracy, a noble title, and when his patron, the king, died, so he was just forced to return to Bologna and to Firenze and to die there. But it is very interesting that Russia, except for endowing these 4 clarinets in the court orchestra, Russian Empire enabled to move from one social stratum to another with quite an ease, and Sarti used it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating paper. Questions from the floor? I can see lots of looks of congratulations and amazement at the material that you've uncovered for us. I have a question. Do we know any other similar cases who had quite the same amount of success? Or like, was Sarti more cunning than perhaps others? Or did he set a path for others to then follow in some kind of way? I mean, how unique would this be?
Well, do you mean cultural and cultural success, or financial and social? Sarti,
I mean,
Sarti, yeah. He was quite a thin, I should say, because during his service in Copenhagen, it was between 1763 to 1775, with a period of break when he returned to Italy to find singers, etc. He was granted the similar status of colonel, so he was colonel already from Denmark. But then he entered in a very silly way to the Strunzi affair, and he was in a jail. He was forced to leave Copenhagen without his property during 1 week. So he escaped from Copenhagen, but he knew how to do this. It is such a mystery. Why didn't he return to Milano and prefer to follow Potemkin with him in the middle of nowhere? It's really stunning. His courage and his as I already used this word, chutzpah. I know that it's kind of an international. So yeah, it is Sarti. And what is interesting, that his son-in-law, Natalia Mussini, who was a Kapellmeister of the Queen Mother in Berlin, but after she died in 1805, probably Mussini heard and learned from Sarti about all these opportunities given by the Russian Empire. He arrives in Russia in 1808 and stays there, not as a Kapellmeister, on a diplomatic service, on some very secret and mysterious, the circumstances prevent me from sitting for quite a period in Ergada and in other archives in Moscow, but he was serving Alexander the Great before the Great Patriotic War, the Patriotic War of 1812. So there was a 4 years period Mussini was in Russian Empire. We know this from his correspondence with Giuliana Sarti, who remains in Berlin and in Potsdam. And he was trying to use the same pattern, but something just was, did not work properly.
And do you know if it's quite concentrated within musicians being able to use that mobility, or whether it's actually a much wider way of navigating that kind of society at the time?
For example, Pietro di Gottardo Gonzaga, who was a famous stage designer in Italy, in Milano, La Scala, etc. And then he arrived in Russia in 1792 by a special invitation extended by Count Boris Yusupov, who was the director of the theater direction. His salary started from 6,000. Listen, 6,000, we are just using the numbers, but it was a huge amount of money, 6,000. Then it was, I will tell you exactly, it became 10,000. 6,000 is as twice as music director was paid. Then it became 10,000, and he got a state apartment, wood for heating, working materials, and an atelier at the Hermitage Theater with 2 legs, okay? And then in a contract signed in 1800, so it's just 8 years past, he was paid in total 1,400 rubles and the dacha in Pavlovsk, and he was working for a number of noble patrons in Moscow region and in St. Petersburg, and he died only in 1831, so he just enjoyed all the, wellness you could just dream in Italy.
Inna, please.
Just to conclude your question, Maria, and thank you, first of all, Bela, for, as usual, a very deep, a very documented, backed presentation.
Thank you, Inna.
Which has to be read, not listened to. So I'm looking forward for publication. But I want just to say, Traetta, Galuppi, Martino Soler, a dozen of others, especially during Catherine the Second time, even with not only by, Catherine set the type model for this, but Yusupov, Sheremetyev, Vorontsov, and blah, blah, blah. They all supported musicians as a quasi princes. Foreign musicians. I have to.
Yes, foreign musicians. And even, for example, Paolo Primo, he was a music lover, he and his wife, Maria Fedorovna, and their 10 children, they understand music. They watched opera every night in Gatchina and in Hermitage. But Catherine, she was kind of deaf. She did not appreciate, but it was kind of a pattern of social behavior. So she maintained these composers in St. Petersburg and paid them salaries. But for example, Manfredini, Francesco Manfredini, who was a court composer during Catherine's period, and he was not as famous as Galuppi, Paisiello, Traetta, even Martino Soler, even the one who had a private troupe, Anna, what's his name? The private Italian troupe of
Astarita.
Astarita. So Manfredini returned to Italy. Then when Paolo Primo was inaugurated as an emperor, he came to St. Petersburg. He was already old. He was not such great a composer as the rest of them, but Paolo granted him a pension of 3,000 ruble in a year, there is a letter that Manfredini writes to Moretti. Unfortunately, to Manfredini, he died a year later, but yeah, this was a pattern. Yeah, Russians, they know to support Italian artists.
So it must have actually penetrated the fabric of society in a way that probably couldn't take hold in the rest of maybe Europe in quite the same way because of the uniqueness of the structures, I guess.
Yeah, because this kind of a mobility, it was not part of the Western Europe, and I know from my research on the Paolo, who was hosting the Catholic Order of Hospitallers, Order of Malta. All the Catholic mobility came to St. Petersburg. It was not thousands, but they came to St. Petersburg, and there was an anti attitude from the local nobility. So it was not that simple. Yeah.
Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. Other questions to conclude this session?
But if I may, just as we moved from this main topic of your paper to the general biography of Sarti, I'd just like to have an update whether you have some news about actually the service that Sarti granted, but Sheremetyev in Moscow.
No, same thing. I should tell that there is no official document. I was seeking for it years, and also, but there is a curious document that once Potemkin writes to Sheremetyev that he would like Sheremetyev to to load him his chef. For cooking, how do you say it in English?
Cook, maybe?
Cook for a couple of months. So maybe this was an informal agreement. So you're giving me your cook, I will give you my composer or something.
Yes.
There is not. I remember that you were interested in this. Yeah.
Of course, for our standards, that sounds very strange, but that was usual.
Yeah.
And there was this mobility within the country, and yes, Gonzaga also was landed to Yusupov and then Sheremetyev on some occasions. So that was very usual, actually.
Yeah.
So we're waiting.
If I find anything when I'm back to Moscow and Petersburg, I will update you immediately. I'm seeking for any kind of document on this.
Yes, that's a sort of hole in the. Yes, we were talking about the texture, and there's a hole in this texture in the Sheremetyev area that it still has to be filled.
I agree.
And now the war doesn't help, of course, but
no, for sure.
Let's hope for a short ending.
I think we're joining our congratulations one more time to actually all of the papers in this session. And thank you very much. And we will be rejoining after a break for the next session. So I look forward to seeing you there when I'll be handing over to the next chair. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.